pretty bad, and then they get worse. You ever experienced that? And so it's meant to be kind of funny, and it's serious all at the same time, and that kind of sets the tone for our Jonah series. First of all, I want to say today, this is a packed day for us. Our fall festival is going on, and then we're also collecting items that are going to be donated to families at the border, diapers and formula. We live in a time when there's a lot of bad news and a time of stress and anxiety. But if you want some inspiration, if you're here in person, you want to look back to that corner right back there and look at that wall, that mountain of diapers and formula that people have donated there. Do you think you deserve a hand for that? Now, in addition to that, there's an entire pickup truck full of diapers that are not there right now that somebody is donating, and I think there are other people who got more. So we're seriously looking at 2 or 3 pickup truck loads of diapers and formula that are going to be donated to the Keno Border Initiative to bless families who are in desperate need. And so thank you for your generosity, and man, it does my heart good, doesn't it you? To see all that stuff. It's just such a great display of humanity and love and the love of Jesus that you've done there. So thank you so much for that. And first of all, I need to say I'm a little tired this morning. I don't know if I sound like it or not, but I am. My wife and I have reached the age where we're basically just chauffeurs for our little boys now. We just drive them around to activities. And so yesterday we had a baseball game in the morning, and then we had a music recital lunchtime, and then we had a basketball game at night. And then, of course, trick-or-treating tomorrow and all that, and then the fall festival, and oh man, I need a nap. I'm ready for a good night's sleep. So I'm trying to pep up here, but if I'm tired, that's why. So, all right. So today we're starting this new series, a 4-week series in the book of Jonah. And for some of us, we hear Jonah and we're like, really? I mean, is that as adults we're gonna talk about the book of Jonah, because the version of Jonah that we have, maybe the only thing we've ever heard, is Jonah gets swallowed by a fish or a whale, and then there are arguments about whether a guy can survive in a fish's belly for 3 days, and then it just derails from there, and there's no other meaning. We don't know it just seems like a weird story and people argue between fundamentalists and others, like, did this really happen? And so what you're going to see here over the next 4 weeks is why Jonah might be my favorite book in the Bible. Jonah is incredibly relevant for the times that we live in on the big scale and world events and what's going on in America. And it's also eternally relevant for even the deepest issues that we all face in our personal lives. Jonah speaks to big world events and how we view our enemies in geopolitical situations and conflict and division in society. And it also speaks to our deepest feelings and our experiences of life and what can lie behind those. And so it's relevant in every generation. Jonah is a prophet, which means somebody who speaks for God. Jonah's a preacher. But God gives him a message to relay to the people of Nineveh, and Jonah runs from God. And it's one of the best pieces of literature in the Bible. Bible scholars will say this might be the best written piece of literature. It's a short story. It's kind of a combination. And again, it's meant to be funny as well as serious. It's kind of a combination of Edgar Allan Poe and Seinfeld. And could be the best written piece of literature in the Bible. It's 4 chapters, 48 verses total. You could read Jonah in like 15 or 20 minutes. And I invite you to do that during this series if you're willing to do that. We don't know who wrote it. We don't know when it was written, sometime between 800 and 200 BC. It's mysterious, but we have this ancient piece of beautiful literature that is both a tragedy and a comedy. And it speaks to the way that we view our enemies and also how we view our life circumstances. That can lead to either despair or thankfulness in our lives. Jonah, just a couple things to say up front. It doesn't seem like it's meant to be read as a literal historical story. It reads like a short story, like a work of fiction, much like a parable. Jesus often taught in parables. A parable is a story that illustrates a spiritual point. The point of a parable is not whether it's historically true or not. Like Jesus, the prodigal son. There was a man who had two sons, and one of them said, Dad, give me the inheritance. It doesn't matter if that literally happened or not. The truth is in the meaning of the parable. Are you with me so far? And so the same, it's thought by Bible scholars, is true of Jonah. Now, that may not be the case. I mean, we don't know. But it reads like a work of artful, masterful fiction, like a parable. The truth is found in its meaning. Again, it's funny. It reads like a piece of social satire that makes fun of certain attitudes. He runs in the exact opposite direction that God calls him, and he sails out into the Mediterranean. He's swallowed by a fish. And then yet, as we unpack this, we discover that its meaning then was deeply profound, and the same is true now. So if you just think about, even before the division of the last few years, think about conflict in the world and where we always seem to find our military conflicts over the past 30 years in the Middle East. Jonah is set, of course, in the Middle East, and the city that we're going to read about, the city of Nineveh, was located in what is now northern Iraq. What relevance could that have for the United States, correct? And ISIS destroyed, actually, part of the ruins of Nineveh, this ancient archaeological site. Ancient Nineveh, is located across the river from Tikrit, which is the hometown of Saddam Hussein. And Jonah is about how we see the people we believe are our enemies. Now, of course, Americans used to think that our enemies were someplace else. Over the past few years, because of propaganda and the behavior of some politicians who have done this on purpose, we have been pitted against each other. So now we don't necessarily look to the Middle East for who we believe are our enemies, but we might look to our friends, family members, people who have different views than us. And if we're going to be honest, I think a lot of us would say this is actually a pretty terrible time in U.S. history. The times that we live in. I mean, if you've been around for a while, I was talking to somebody who is maybe 20, early 20s, and I'm like, there was this time in America that was way better than this. It was called the 90s. Anybody remember this? And it just seems like, 9/11 happened, and then the wars, and then the past few years. I mean, there was a time that was better than this. I'm just going to be honest with you. I said, objectively, it was better than this. And that may have been true in decades before I was born as well, but we live in a difficult time. And so Friday, the husband of the Speaker of the House was attacked with a hammer by somebody who broke into their home and apparently was looking for the Speaker of the House. I mean, that's historic. That's violence and division on a historic level that is happening in this country right now. And Jonah is profoundly relevant for the time that we live in and in personal ways. So this short 4-week series could make a difference in how we view the people around us that certainly seem like our enemies. At least sometimes they try to make us their enemies. And it could profoundly change how you view your own life and how you feel about life right now and the decisions you make. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I'm going to read several verses in Jonah chapter 1. It's entertaining. So we're just going to read the verses, and this is going to set the stage and break down what chapter 1 can say to us this morning. So let's read it together. From Jonah chapter 1, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. I think we'll have this on the screen here. I hope so. Verse 3, but Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. So if we were looking at a map, pretend this is Israel, Nineveh, which is now Iraq, it's over here. Tarshish is Spain. Jonah goes the exact opposite direction. He's like, hard pass. And he gets a ship for Spain, in the exact opposite direction. Verse 4, then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God. and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone below deck, where he laid down and fell into a deep sleep. The captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish." Then the sailors said to each other, "Come, let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity." They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they asked him, "Tell us, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? And from what people are you?" He answered, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." This terrified them, and they asked, "What have you done?" They knew he was running away from the Lord because he had already told them so. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, "What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?" I love this, verse 12. Jonah's like, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea." He replied, "And it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you." Instead, the men did their best to row back to the land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. Then they cried out to the Lord, "Please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man. For you, Lord, have done as you pleased." Then they took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. So God calls this prophet, who's supposed to be obedient to God, supposed to go preach. That's what prophet means. And he calls him to go to an incredibly large city in another country called Nineveh, and tell them that if they don't turn from their wicked ways, God is going to destroy their city. And Jonah responds by immediately running in the exact opposite direction from Nineveh. And then the sea kicks up, and think about the reputation of sailors. If you're a sailor, no offense, but sailors are supposed to be rough characters, kind of roughnecks, and they're good guys compared to Jonah. They're like, "What'd you do? And Lord, please don't hold us responsible for taking this man's life." Jonah's the worst person in the story. He's the anti-hero. He's like the whiskey priest. He just fumbles his way through life, and so they throw him overboard, and the sea becomes calm, and then he's swallowed by a fish. So now, in the times we live in a time of a resurgence of religious fundamentalism, since the 1980s, late 70s, and then before that, the 1920s, as a response to Charles Darwin and evolution and origin of species in the late 1800s, there are these times in which religious fundamentalism rises to the surface, and then when people think of Christian, they just think of a fundamentalist. That's not always the case, by the way. There are eras in U.S. history where if you said Christian, they wouldn't necessarily think of a fundamentalist first. They might think of a more reasonable person first. But we're in a time in a resurgence of fundamentalism. And so people who think they're protecting the Bible from science or questions or intellectual honesty will say that everything that happens in the Bible that is presented as a miracle has to be historically true. And so God created the world in 6 literal 24-hour days, and they're just always kind of fighting science and the Enlightenment and believing that they're defending the Bible. And so Jonah gets reduced to an argument about whether a guy can survive in a fish's belly. Like, don't fish have stomach acids? And it's completely misses the point of the story, like so much of the Bible now. When fundamentalists who believe they're defending the Bible, they reduce it to such literalism that thinking people no longer take it seriously. Now, if you have no problem with miracles, yeah, God literally provided a fish and swallowed this guy, and he was in the belly for 3. Well, then good. I mean, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that either. It's just that the point of Jonah gets lost in this argument between religious fundamentalists and people who tend to ask questions more. Maybe that's a theme in your life. Maybe you have a lot of relationships with people who they almost treat you like an enemy because maybe you're more open to questions than they are. And so the fish is an entertaining and meaningful way to get Jonah out of the ocean, out of the Mediterranean Sea, and get him back on track. Regardless of whether you believe it's literal or not, that's how the fish functions in the story. Jonah's a dead man. He's going to drown in the Mediterranean. But the fish is a way to save his life, provide a way, a vessel, to get this person who is running from God back on track and get him pointed in the right direction. So once we get past like the simplistic arguments back and forth, we can take this seriously for the context of the story. Jonah doesn't want to preach to the people of Nineveh because he knows that if he does, God will be merciful to them and spare them. And the thought of God sparing the people of Nineveh is so disgusting to Jonah, he wants nothing to do with it. Why? Because they're his enemies. The Ninevites were the geopolitical enemies of the children of Israel. And back in 2003, when we were in Iraq, it would have been the exact scenario. Well, these are your enemies. These Iraqis are your enemies, supposedly. And we don't want God to have mercy on them. I don't want God to have mercy on somebody that I hate. I want to see God destroy their city. I don't want to go and preach God's mercy to them. And there had been wars, and there had been disgusting actions taken, and things that were wrong, and injustice perpetuated, and violence committed. And Jonah said, no way am I going to these people. So it's a funny story, but then you start to understand, well, there's a human element here. No, I don't want to go preach to these people that I hate. I don't want God to be merciful. I want God to smite these people. That's what I want. I want God to be the almighty smiter and smite these Ninevites. I don't want the people of Nineveh experiencing good things. And so he's known as the prophet who runs from God. So God thinks that showing mercy to the Ninevites would be good. They had a reputation for being violent. In the Assyrian Empire, they crucified people. They impaled people. That was their reputation. And apparently God thinks it would be good to change their hearts. But Jonah doesn't want that. He's not able to see what God sees as good in the bigger picture. He can't get past his own feelings about those people. I know a guy who got passed over for a job opportunity, and he was telling me about this, and he knows the person who was hired, and he admitted to me that he struggles to see that person in the same way. He's jealous. And I appreciate his honesty. He said, I'm envious of this person who got hired instead of me, and the person who got hired is a woman. And he said, I'm fighting this belief, it's affirmative action. She got hired because she's a woman, and I got screwed out of the job. And so he's feeling this envy because of his viewpoint. I know a kind, good-hearted lady who told me one time that she can't think about her ex-husband enjoying life. Because if he's enjoying life, then she feels depressed. She doesn't want him to enjoy life. Appreciate her honesty. We don't like to admit feelings like this, but the truth is we do have feelings like this, and it may be a different circumstance for you, but like Jonah, if you're keeping track, if you're a note taker, we can run from what is good in our lives because we have a distorted view of what good is. And that's when kind of Jonah moves from a comedy to a little more serious. Like, ugh, I don't like the sound of that. It's a little too personal, too challenging sometimes. But I can actually end up running from God, running from what is good in my life. Because of pain in my life, I'm not able to see what is actually good. I'm not actually able to see what would work out best in the long run, or what would even help me in my own life. I'm trapped in pain or envy or revenge or despair and sadness or self-pity, and I'm not able to see what's good. And so I can end up running from what is good because I'm not able to see it. So here we are in election season in 2022 America, and the people who chant nationalist slogans and who feel empowered all of a sudden again on Twitter over the past few days, and they believe wild conspiracy theories, and they vote for candidates who seem to be sociopathic at times, and believe propaganda and will spout overtly racist things to justify their beliefs. People who stormed the Capitol, etc. these people think they're right. Now, that's a sobering thought for all of us, because we tend to look at the actions of somebody we disagree with or that we're disgusted by, and rightly so. And we just ascribe to them evil motives. I'm good, they're evil. Now, I'm not going to argue with you. And at the same time, we miss a layer of reality and complexity when we fail to realize these folks think they're right. They think that they're justified in their beliefs. They're able to justify violence against other people because they think an election was stolen, or they think that somebody of a different color got a job that they should have gotten, or something, which is, again, ludicrous. And it's based in hatred and bigotry. But they're not like, oh, I know I'm wrong and evil, but I'm going to go ahead and believe it anyway. That's not how human psychology works. They think they're right. They're able to justify their own beliefs and their own actions. And as I've read Jonah again and thought about the times that we're living in, that is a sobering thought to me. Because that causes me to ask, wait a second, I always think I'm right. What if I'm not right about everything? I'm the things that they're spouting and slogans and the race. No, I don't doubt. I do think I'm right. We should love people. But there are lots of things that aren't involved with that, and I think I'm right about. And then maybe a few years go by and my views change, or maybe I mature and I'm able to handle a situation better. And I used to see something one way, and now I see it a different way. And it's a sobering thought that for all of us, and I'm not comparing it to nationalism and so on, but it's an example to me that it's a sobering thought that you and I are capable of self-justifying our actions, right or wrong, because of our viewpoint. We can believe things that aren't true. We can be fooled. We can be conned. We can believe our own press. Because of pain in our lives especially, we can develop a distorted view of what good is. And we can actually get wrapped up and all worked up and want revenge and work ourselves into a lather against somebody, and we can convince ourselves that that's good, even if it would actually just make things way worse if we got our way. And so it's just a reminder to me that all of us have this ability to get it wrong. And it's a sobering thought, and it causes humbleness, or it should cause us to be humble. Nobody wants to be like the nationalist who believes they're right and supports things that are actually anti-Christ in the name of Christ. None of us wants to do things like that. But it's not just nationalism, it's anything. None of us want to make a mistake like that and have such a distorted view of good that we run from good. More personally, do you struggle with anger and envy? Does it pain you to see somebody you don't like prosper? I'll be honest now. I know there's the right answer in church, and then there's the correct answer. Does it pain you sometimes to see some people doing well? If they're happy, does it make you sad? Your feelings are based on your view of them. They may not even be doing anything to you anymore. Maybe they did in the past, but they're not doing it now. But your memory of that makes you miserable. Gives you a distorted view of good. You know it would be good to move on and be free from that, but you're running from good. You're holding on to ill feelings toward these people, and now it's hurting you. I mean, they're not maybe in your life anymore, but it's just hurting you now. But it's so easy to run from the good. Are you in a relationship and you are sure that your partner is a stark raving narcissist? And then you hear, like a few months ago in the relationship series, we talked about how if you go to YouTube and you look for relationship advice, like half the videos are like how to deal with a partner who's a narcissist. And then, like, according to psychologists, 4% of human beings are narcissists. And so there's a 90, and if you're dealing, whoever you're dating, there's a 98% chance that person's not a narcissist. And could it be that other things are happening? communication breakdown, and then gossip, going to friends and talking about it instead of going to that person, and then they say, oh, I can't, you don't deserve that, you deserve better than that. That person doesn't deserve you. Yeah, you're right. And then instead of talking to the person, we just go back and forth with our friends, and pretty soon, before you know it, they're just like the spawn of Satan. And actually, no, they're just another human being that struggles with insecurity just like you do. Now, some people have dated stark raving narcissists, and if you have, that's a horrible experience. This is a broadcast. I'm not taking it away from you, but a lot of times that's just how we get distorted, how our view gets distorted. Maybe you're single and you have a tendency to sabotage relationships. You believe things about relationships you may not realize you believe. Well, they're all like this. And it comes from pain and how we've rationalized that pain and how we self-justify. Or you say, well, the person who cares the most loses, so I'll be like, whatever. And how's that going to work out in a relationship? And so we just kind of go in half-hearted, and from the beginning, we've got this residue from the past that we bring into this new relationship that just sabotages it. Or I'll just pretend I don't need commitment, and I'll never be hurt, and I'll just act like I'm not interested. Or are you afraid of change or taking the next step in life? You're afraid because you believe certain things about the situation, or just things that maybe you've experienced in the past, or somebody's told you, and you have a distorted view of what good could be in your life. Is it a job change? I mean, is it a potential good opportunity? But you have a distorted view of what good can look like. Maybe you're afraid. Maybe you lack confidence. I'm not sure I could succeed. And so you stay trapped in something you don't like when there's something good right in front of you, but you lack confidence and you're afraid to see it. And you, like Jonah, you run from good. Do you find yourself, and this is a tough one, do you find yourself hating people who disagree with you? And we're in this situation now in America where, I tell you, I believe it's the most important time in our history to vote, okay? I think it's all on the line. And so I think we should all vote. We should all be engaged and speak up for what's right. Silence benefits the oppressor. And at the same time, it's easy to see hatred from folks who think they're right, but their ideas are based in bigotry and hatred. And we see that, and it's so tempting to hate them back. And so we're in this conundrum of how do we stand up for what's right? How do we vote for what's right? How do we stand up and let our voice be counted, which we should, but then yet not hate people? To do what's right, but not hate them. There's an old U2 lyric, I can't remember the song, but it goes, you become the monster, so the monster does not break you. When we face something that's a threat, we can become a monster just like they are, but we don't want to do that. We want to stand for what's right and love and vote and speak out, but yet we don't want to hate like they do. And it's so easy to run from the good. Now, it gets deeper because in the comedy of Jonah running from God and the sailors being like better moral characters than he is, and there's something that is even deeper there. Jonah is suicidal. Jonah is despairing to the point that when the Mediterranean is about to capsize the boat, he's down there sleeping. He's like, I don't care if I live or die. Who cares? Throw me overboard. He's suicidal. What has happened to him and his people is so grievous to him that he feels forsaken by God. No, I'm not going to go preach God's mercy to these people. He's wounded. He's deeply hurt to the extent that he is suicidal. And for some of us, if we're honest, we do understand what that feels like. Sometimes it is based in how we view other people. I have been hurt so badly that I just can't get past it. Other times, it is a chemical imbalance. Depression is real. Again, we believe in medical science in this church. Our brains are made of chemicals, and maybe seeing a counselor or antidepressants could help. But that's what Jonah is experiencing. He's suicidal. And if you are in that situation, it can be difficult to see, and it may not be that you envy somebody. It just may be that, again, there's a chemical imbalance happening. It can be difficult to see how life can be worth it. And you can just not even want to go another day. If that's you, first of all, I'm a pastor, and you know pastors have a way of making things simple and black and white and easy. I want you to hear that I understand that depression is not that. But I do want to say to you that you are loved, and whether you believe it or not, your life is worth it and valuable. And I do implore you to seek help if you feel that way. Don't choose a permanent solution to a temporary problem. All right, seek hope. You all agree with that? Seek help. Seek hope. There's something for you to live for. Now, brings us to the next point. And again, if it's a chemical imbalance, that's not the case. But when it comes to running from good, it might be our own thinking that leads to even more pain. It might be our own thinking that even leads to more painful feelings in our lives. Cognitive behavioral therapy is based on the idea that our thoughts determine our feelings. Once again, there could be chemical issues, though, okay, that you don't have control over. But if I feel bad, cognitive behavioral therapy would say, okay, if I feel bad, there may be thoughts that are leading to my feelings. Thoughts that lead to my painful feelings. And if I feel good, there may be thoughts that lead to those positive feelings. So let's get into our thoughts and let's figure out, what is it that I'm thinking? What thought do I have that leads to the feelings that I'm experiencing? So for Jonah, his thoughts about the Ninevites, his hatred for them, created his feelings of despair. So his situation got worse because of his thinking. And once again, I was in an introspective mood preparing this sermon. What can I learn? What can I gain in a difficult time in America? And just all of us are going through our own stuff. What can I gain? The ancient Roman philosopher Seneca said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Isn't that a powerful quote? That's one that just like, ugh. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. If you're like me, and I'll just kind of do a little pastoral confession here, I'm a brooder. I tend to brood. Anybody with me on that? I tend to brood over negative feelings and experiences. I ruminate. I try to make sense of it. Some things you just can't make sense of, by the way, I've discovered the older I get. But I will tend to brood over things that have happened and just try to replay it, and what happened here, and why did that person do this, and what should I do now, and how dare they do that to me or say that to me. And so when we get into that brooding and that rumination, we think we're right and other people are wrong, and we're victims and they're bad. We're innocent and they're guilty and they're hurting us. And now there could be truth in that. I mean, I'm not taking that away. That could be true. Or it could be partly true. But those of us who brood and ruminate, we can actually replay it so much that it creates more suffering in our lives than the person who doesn't ruminate or brood about it so much. Our thoughts about it that just keep going on and on and on, it can make it more painful than the original event. Just an example out of my own life, I'm a recovering approval addict. And I say I'm partially recovering, I think. And so I've shared before about my experience of seeing a counselor a few times in my life, and that's been incredibly helpful to me. And I want to be seen. There's more confessions here. I don't know what it is. I'm in a confessional mood. I don't know. Scary. I want to be seen as an intelligent, successful, capable person. I hope if you don't see me that way, just lie to me. Just tell me you do. That's how I want to be seen. I want you to think that I'm an intelligent, capable, successful guy. I'm an Enneagram 3. Anybody know what I'm talking about? I'm a professional, you know. And so I just want to be intelligent and capable. And if I believe that people don't like me, or they don't think that I'm this intelligent, capable, nice, successful guy, then that can lead me to question myself and ruminate and brood and even feel, I'm embarrassed to say it at times in my life, despair. And so I shared that with a counselor one time, and the counselor told me that my desire for approval works like this. He said, imagine that you're on the deck of a ship, like Jonah, and there are a bunch of heavy wooden barrels on the deck of the ship. And there's a rope tied around one of these barrels, and the other end of the rope is tied to your ankle. And when somebody, and here's the key, not when somebody disapproves of you, when you think they disapprove of you. Yeah, everybody catch that difference? It's like you pick up the barrel and throw it over the side of the ship, and you're just carried over like Jonah into the water, and this is all happening in your head. And he was kind of poking fun of me a little bit. He's like, so there's a barrel, and you're tied to the barrel, and somebody's throwing the barrel over, but it may not even be them. You think it is. But it doesn't matter whether the person actually approves of you or not, because it's if you think they don't approve of you, you pick up the barrel and throw it over the side. And he was having fun. He's like, why are you doing that? I don't know. It's a good question. And so it works like this, that whenever we are brooding, ruminating, or when we have assumptions that maybe we've never tested about what people think or what has happened to us, we haven't gotten an objective point of view from somebody who's qualified, like a counselor, not just the friend who always takes your side thinking they're helping, but somebody who knows what they're doing. We can discover that, wait, no, it's actually if I think they're not approving of me, whether they are or not, I'm throwing the barrel over the side. I'm casting myself into the sea. It's going on in my head. And it's my choice. My thoughts have led to those feelings, and I'm not being made to do anything. Nobody's holding a gun to my head and making me think this way or feel this way. It's challenging, but it's also empowering. The way I think can influence heavily the way that I feel. And so you think about your own feelings. What are you struggling with? How can you identify with Jonah? Are there thoughts that are leading to those feelings? I feel a certain way. If my ex enjoys life, that means I can't. I mean, are there thoughts that lead to that? Yes, there are. Or this person hurt me, and so now I can't move on. They hurt me so badly, if I get over it, it'll be like they didn't hurt me. We fall into that thinking. And friend, of course, you know, if somebody hurt you in the past and they're not even in your life anymore, you're the one who's being held captive now by that. Forgiveness is actually setting you free at that point. It's just being willing to say, you know what, I'm healing. I'm not going to let that person hurt me anymore. But our thoughts can lead to those feelings. Or I'm in a job I'm miserable in, but I want to do something else, but I'm just so full of anxiety and I don't know what to do. Is it because you think you can't succeed in the new job? Is it because you think you won't make enough money? Or what thoughts are true? What thoughts aren't? And so you can kind of work backwards. How do I feel? But what thoughts are leading to those feelings? Our thinking can actually increase our pain. And maybe you can even try this exercise with yourself. Anybody have a debate class where you had to argue one side of the story and then your teacher sprung on you that now you have to argue the other side? Has anybody experienced that? I remember 11th or 12th grade, we had to argue, I think it was capital punishment. Like, we had to argue, and my side was against it first, and now we have to, okay, now, surprise, now you have to argue for capital punishment. Like, oh, man. And suddenly you're forced to consider the opposite view. So as you think about thoughts that may be increasing your pain, like Jonah, what are the opposite thoughts? I mean, if you really want to get serious about it, okay, I feel this way. What are my thoughts that are leading to these feelings? Okay, I think it's this. I'm thinking this. And now that thought is leading to this feeling. Okay, so now sometimes it can be hard to challenge that thought because we're really good at self-justifying and fooling ourselves. And so as an exercise, you can just do this. Okay, here's the thought that leads to my feelings. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to argue the opposite thought. I'm not just going to tweak it. I'm going to argue the opposite. If I'm having a hard time enjoying life because my ex is doing well, and my thought is, that got somebody. Hey, you know, we've all been there. And my thought is, well, if they're enjoying life, I can't be happy because they hurt me. And if they're happy, I have to be sad. Well, that thought's going to lead to you feeling a lot of pain in your life. What's the opposite thought? I mean, let's not tweak it. I want my ex to be happy. Oh, that's debate class right there. Argue from the other side now. I want my ex to be happy. Like, oh, I can't even bear the thought. We can identify with Jonah now. We can see why a person can be driven to the point of despair, run in the opposite direction. But of course, like I said a few minutes ago, if your thoughts about your ex are, and I'm just picking it, this is one example, there are millions of examples. If your thoughts about your ex are like that, you're the one who's being held captive. And so, whether your ex has a good life or not, you're not having a good life if you're held captive by those thoughts. So set yourself free on that one. Set yourself free on that one. And you say, yeah, I want them to have a good life, and I want to have a good life. I want everybody to have a good life. Argue from the other side, just like debate class. Then we're going to move on, wrapping up here. So when Jonah is cast into the sea, for a Hebrew reader, they already know that he's headed for trouble. When he gets in the boat and he goes out to sea, they know that he's headed for trouble. Because kind of like Phoenicians, wherever you're watching this here, we're in the middle of a desert. You know, we're surrounded by sand. There's no beach here in Arizona. A lot of sand, but no water. And the Hebrew people, they lived inland. And there are parts of Israel that look just like this, by the way, in Arizona. Like Jericho, if you remember Joshua and the walls of Jericho. Jericho looks like Chandler. Palm trees, it's the same kind of climate. And so they're kind of desert dwellers. And for the Hebrew people, the sea was a symbol of chaos. It was different to them. They weren't really seafaring people. Remember in Jonah, Genesis chapter 1, there are forces, watery forces of chaos. And God puts dry land in there and separates the chaos. And then the Noah and the ark story, like the floodgates are open and all that chaos comes pouring in. And the sea is a symbol for chaos. And so the Hebrew readers knew Jonah was in trouble when he got in the boat. Man, he's headed to chaos. And then, of course, the storm comes up, more chaos, and then he's thrown in. Now Jonah's drowning in chaos. His life has been consumed by chaos. His life gets progressively more chaotic when he runs from good. And the chaos is frightening. And getting out of the chaos is frightening because when you're just being tossed around in the sea, if you've ever gone body surfing and a wave hit you really hard, you know who's boss. And when the chaos just feels like it's just throwing you around and you're not sure which way's up, you're not sure how to even get out of this. Now, you're in a place in life where you don't know what good is. You know you're hurting and nothing feels right anymore. And you're just spinning around and tumbling in the waves like poor Jonah. Often this is the case. The way to get back on track is the thing that scares you the most. So lastly, be open to events that point you in the right direction, even when you're afraid. Especially when you're afraid. You scared of that job change? You hate your job? You feel like, man, there's this job out there that I think I could really enjoy. But you're afraid. Guess what direction you should probably go in? Actually, toward the fear. It's often the case. Because in the psychology of all this, often we run from things because we're afraid of them. And so if you want to get pointed in the right direction, it's probably going to look like headed towards actually what you fear. So be open to that event, that wake-up call, that sign, that sermon, that friendly conversation, that counseling appointment, that serendipitous moment that somehow something happens and it just kind of points you in the right direction and you're scared to death. Be open to that direction. Not always, but often the event that will point you in the right direction will actually point you in the direction that you're afraid of. Be open, especially when you're afraid. If you find yourself swallowed by a fish, that's a pretty clear sign. Yeah, we're afraid now, sure. But then there are other things that happen to you in life. They grab us, they scare us. And suddenly you're forced to see things in a new way and it feels uncomfortable. It feels like, oh man, I don't know about this. It feels scary. But that fear might be an indicator that you're pointed in the right direction. I'm going to close with this. I'm going to show you a video. It's about 3 minutes and 45 seconds long. Perhaps your thoughts are the root cause of your pain. Perhaps you're afraid. Perhaps you believe things that are leading to more pain in your life and you're running from the good. And when you run, things just get more chaotic. I want to show you a video of Sarah Bessey. Some of you know her. She's an author and speaker, wife and mom. And This video, it's called Lean Into It, and she uses childbirth as a metaphor for leaning into the difficult experiences of life in spite of your fear. And that this is just how life tends to work. Are you going through a time of questioning your faith and you're scared? It's going to work like this. Are you dealing with thoughts and feelings and trying to figure out what's good in your life and get pointed in the right direction? It's likely going to feel like this. So it's a 3-minute talk called Lean Into It. Let's watch.
I came across the phrase lean into it actually when I was getting ready to give birth. This is part of the reason I think why I'm always advocating for the voices and experiences of women in the church, is because we have some unique stories. And for me, a lot of mine go back to the experiences of pregnancy and birth and raising small children and nursing. And I think that there's so many metaphors for the kingdom of God in there. At least that's what I found. At least that's where God met me, maybe because it was such a transformative experience. And I know not every woman experiences that, but for me it was transformative in every way. And one of the things I found as I was giving birth, and as I've given birth to 3 children who have lived, but I've given birth to 7, is that the pain is worse when I'm resisting and when I'm fighting it. But Dr. Sears called it the fear, tension, pain cycle, that you're afraid, and so there's more tension, and then there's more pain. And because there's more pain, you feel more afraid. And so then there's more tension, and then there is more pain. And you just kind of keep chasing this around and around, and it builds in intensity and sabotages the new life that you're trying to bring forth. And I've found that in all my experiences of giving birth in many different ways, because I have had loss, and I have had grief, and I have had a very typical hospital birth, and then my son was unintended home birth. He arrived without anybody around, and my husband and I were in a parking garage, and he just came with a crowd of people. It was not, if there's one thing I've learned about bringing forth new life, it's that it's not very dignified.
Like donkeys
and no, it could have been parking spot 74. And then my third was, we had midwives, and we were at home, and it was really redemptive and beautiful, and just a really healing experience for me in so many ways to be able to experience that. But what I found as I was walking through all of those experiences is that was the one thing that was universal. The more afraid I was, the more tension there was, and then there was more pain. And that the only way to disrupt that cycle, because I had all my children without any drugs, the only way to disrupt that cycle for me was to lean into the pain and to stop fighting it and to release into it. And that it doesn't mean there still isn't labor. It doesn't mean that it still isn't what it is. But when the fear was gone, then the tension was gone, and the pain, I could manage, and I could work my way through. And so the more that I leaned into the pain, the easier it was to give birth. Not easy, but easier. And I began to see that as a metaphor for a lot of how the new things that God was doing in me, whether it was in how I looked at church, or how I looked at communities, or how I looked at relationships, my relationship with scripture, or whatever else it was, that the first instinct is to be afraid. And so then that causes the tension, which increases the pain, and you almost are fighting the new life that the Spirit is trying to bring forth. But when you lean into that pain, lean into the questions, stop pretending that they're not there, stop pretending that everything is fine, it's fine, everything's fine, we're all fine, when it's not, but lean into them and walk through them, there is the release that's waiting on the other side of that. It's a new birth all over again.
We can believe things that aren't true. We can actually run from good and increase our own pain. And often, when we encounter events in life that actually point us in the right direction, we'll be afraid. And Sarah Bessie, she beautifully used childbirth as an illustration and said, lean into it. And that challenge that leads you out of the chaos, out of running away from God, running away from good, and now being pointed in the right direction. Lean into it. Don't let the fear stop you from going in the right direction. What would it look like to stop running from good and lean into your fear and be able to come out of that chaos and get in the right direction? Let's pray. God, thank you for a beautiful story that is funny and profound at the same time, the story of Jonah. And God, it's always relevant because it challenges us to examine how we view people who are different than us, who we view as our enemy, people who disagree with us. And also, more personally, it challenges us because all of us run from good in different ways. We fool ourselves because of fear, because of pain. We run from good, and the way we think leads to more pain, and it becomes this cycle that Sarah Bessie was talking about. And God, it causes us to ask, are there things that I've fooled myself over? Could I question some assumptions, some beliefs that I have that lead to my pain? What thoughts are leading to misery? What am I blind to? What am I running from? And then once I ask that, it just opens up a whole new world of possibilities. Because now I'm more open to events that come into my life. For Jonah, it was a fish, a storm, and then a fish. But for us, it may be, a new relationship or a job opportunity or a friendship or a new church or a new way of viewing our faith or a new way of dealing with hardship that we've been dealing with for a long time, a new way of dealing with difficult relationships, the way we view people who seem to treat us like enemies. And we can, even though it's scary, turn and be open to that direction that we fear. It's often the way that we actually need to go. And we can get out of that chaos and get to a much better place. Next week, we'll see how Jonah deals with his distress in the belly of the whale, the belly of the fish. But God, we go through this journey with Jonah, and we start by asking the question, what would it look like to stop running from good things, to change our thoughts and lean into our fear? God, we thank you for the new possibilities that opens for our lives. We thank you for your Spirit and that you're with us on Monday the same way you are Sunday, and tomorrow when we face the reality and our thoughts and our feelings and everything, all of our circumstances, God, we're going to be able to apply this. And you're going to lead us toward a much better experience of life. In Jesus' name, everybody said.